Let's talk about a few implications of having such a large national debt. The first question that we want to ask and pose is the size of the national debt a problem? And for the United States, you may think that having a $25 trillion national debt is going to be a very huge burden on US citizens and the entire country as a whole. But we notice that in the United States, it isn't too much of an issue or too much of a burden because the cost of financing this $25 trillion is actually relatively low. So the main solution or the sort of easy way to answer this question here, as you can see, it's only a problem if the cost of financing the debt places an excessive burden on the budget. So anytime the US government runs a deficit, they need to borrow money. And if they borrow money, they're going to have to pay some type of interest on that borrowed money. However, interest rates have been very, very low at historic lows, to say the least, for a very, very long time. So with very, very low interest rates, this interest payment that the US has to pay every single year in terms of financing the deficits and debts is actually pretty low compared to the national debt and GDP in respective to one another. So low US Treasury rates over the past 2 decades have allowed interest payments on the national debt to be less than 2% of GDP, which is a very, very low amount considering how much debt we actually do have. But it will be a bigger consideration once interest rates start to pick up. So here, we can easily correlate this to you and say maybe student loans. So suppose that you graduate college and you have $75,000 in student loans debt that you need to pay off. In what scenario would you be better? If you finance these student loans at a 2% interest rate or at a 20% interest rate? And obviously the lower the interest rate, the better off your situation is going to be. And this is the situation, the scenario that the US has found itself in for a very, very long time, at least a few decades. So here, as long as interest rates remain relatively low, the excess burden of paying interest on the national debt isn't going to be too much of an issue for the United States. However, it is something that we will have to consider because interest rates will eventually go up, and that's where it can place an excessive burden on us. The second implication that we want to go ahead and talk about is some type of income inequality or equity aspects of national debt. When the United States actually runs some type of deficit, it may actually contribute to an even wider income inequality for citizens living within this country. So take this for an example. When the United States runs a deficit, remember they can sell bonds to the public. But who's more likely to buy these type of bonds, these treasury bills, or who's more sort of financially savvy about these type of things? Rich people or poor people? So wealthier people, of course, know about these financial assets and instrument, and they are more likely to own a portion of the US debt. However, when you own a portion of the US debt, when the US actually sells bonds, they actually have to go ahead and pay some type of interest or have some type of return on it. And who and how exactly do they pay this return? They pay the return by using taxes. And who exactly pays taxes within the United States? It's going to be poor people, it's going to be middle class people, and also rich people as well. So essentially everybody pays taxes. So it's essentially going to be a redistribution of wealth. It takes the taxes from all the individuals within the US, poor, middle class, and rich, and it's going to distribute it to the people that have these bonds, which typically tend to be these wealthier individuals. So essentially, interest payments on the national debt redistribute wealth from the rich, redistribute wealth from essentially everybody to the rich, leading to greater income inequality within the United States. So another implication that we have to be a little bit concerned about whenever the United States does run deficits. So if we get a little bit better financial literacy for everybody within the US, we can get rid of this sort of income inequality, or at least lower it just a bit, because a lot of people actually don't know a lot about owning bonds or any type of financial assets. Another implication we can go ahead and take a look at is who exactly owns the national debt. From this example that we have right here, we do know that a lot of domestic individuals hold US bonds, and that's a very big portion. However, there can be foreign individuals and foreign entities and governments that actually own US bonds, and this is something that we have to be a little bit concerned about, especially as more and more foreign countries and citizens want to own US bonds and treasuries. So take a look at this chart right here. We can take a look at internal versus external debt. Here we have exactly how these different categories, how these different sort of organizations and people essentially own a portion of U.S. debt. We talked about the change in M right here, the change in the money supply, so the Federal Reserve and other government agencies, they own roughly about 27% of the national debt, and the rest is going to be held by the public. So about 75% is held by the public. And the portion that's held by the public can be divided up by foreigners, so external debt, or domestically, which is internal debt. So let's go ahead and break this down a little bit and see exactly what we can sort of analyze from this sort of from this sort of concept. So here, take a look at internally held debt first. So here we have internally held debt. Internally held debt. And like the name implies, internally held debt means that this is a portion of the U.S. debt that is going to be held by banks, corporations, individuals, or any type of entity within the United States. So public debt by U.S. banks, So a lot of U.S. banks like to hold T-bills. We see U.S. corporations as well, corporations, and individuals, so people like you and I, and individuals. So internally held debt, public debt owned by U.S. banks, corporations, and individuals, and as we saw, it's roughly about 45% of our national debt. So 45% of debt. And you can go ahead, like we said before, you can go ahead and buy a portion of U.S. debt by buying these T-bills, no matter what the maturity is. It just says that, hey, this is a portion of internally held debt. However, we do notice that this externally held debt, this percentage has been increasing in value over the years. So externally held debt. And this percentage is something that we will have to be careful of because they are a real claim on U.S. debt. So this is going to be public debt. Externally held debt is public debt owned by foreigners. So held by foreigners. And this can be foreign banks, it can be foreign corporations, foreign individuals, foreign countries as well. And remember that these foreigners, they do like to hold onto U.S. bonds because they are seen as one of the safest assets. Our financial system is seen as one of the most stable financial systems in the world, so they can expect to get some type of return. And we said that this was about 30% of our national debt. So this number has been fluctuating in the over the past few years, but it has been steadily rising over the past few years, and they are a real claim on U.S. debt because as this number or as this percentage gets larger, it just tells us that more and more foreigners are deciding to hold onto U.S. debt. And what countries do you think are going to have the highest percentage of U.S. debt? The country that comes to your mind is probably going to be China, but China is actually only number 2 based on the data that's provided to us. So Japan is actually the country that holds the largest amount of U.S. debt, of roughly about $1.2 trillion. China holds roughly about $1.1 trillion, and rounding out the top 5 are the United Kingdom, Brazil, and Ireland. So these countries right here, they hold the greatest percentage of U.S. national debt through these T-bills. And as you can see right here, we have roughly about $7 billion right now of our debt being held by foreigners. And this number is going to continue to keep on going up because these foreigners, they'd like to have some type of return on their money. They'd like to have very safe assets. So here, this is exactly why they invest in U.S. bonds. So once again, interest payments to foreigners are going to be a real claim on U.S. output, and it is an implication that we will have to be worried about. Another implication that we can take a look at is something known as the crowding out effect. And this is going to once again hurt our future generations because it actually pushes up interest rates. So let's go ahead and see the mechanism and channel of the crowding out effect in detail. So remember that the U.S. government can once again finance its deficits by selling bonds to the public. So that's going to be some type of internally held debt or externally held debt. It's essentially going to be the change in B right here. So here we'll make a new chart right here. So we have when the government runs deficits, it can sell bonds to the public. So it can sell bonds to the public. And once again, this is going to be our change in B. With all of this, this is going to start off a transition or start off a channel that is going to impact you and I, also firms and businesses. So here, when they sell bonds to the public, this causes the demand for loanable funds to increase. It causes the demand for loanable funds to increase. So here, loanable funds, it's just a really fancy way of saying savings or money in general. So savings slash money. And we'll take a look at the loanable funds market in our money chapters. So essentially, it begins the process of causing the demand for loanable funds to increase. So anytime the government decides to finance its deficits by selling bonds to the public, it causes the demand for loanable funds to increase. However, anytime demand is pushed up, the price has to go up. And what is the price of savings or money? It is the interest rate. So this is going to push up interest rates. So pushes up interest rates. And when interest rates are pushed up, what impact is that going to have on you? What impact is that going to have on firms and businesses? Well, first of all, consumer spending is going to be hurt. Consumer spending is going to be hurt because we no longer are going to be able to sort of make big ticket purchase items. So cars, mortgages, maybe some type of student loans, maybe say a refrigerator or a washing machine. We typically finance those, maybe some furniture. But as interest rates go up, that just is going to impact our consumer spending because that increases our costs as well. So it's going to cause consumer spending or consumption to go down. But not only are we hurt, it's going to affect investment as well. So business investment. So firms and corporations, remember, they like very low interest rates because that is going to tell them that, hey, their return is going to be higher because their cost is lower. So not only you and I are hurt, but firms and businesses are hurt, and that causes investment to fall as well. So here, twofold effect. We have consumer spending that is hurt, consumption goes down, and we also have investment that falls as well. So when interest rates get pushed up, C goes down, I goes down. That's not going to be very good for our economy in terms of stimulating it, and that is where our future generations are going to be harmed. So future generations are harmed. If we have less consumption, if we have less investment, that just tells us that our children and our children's children are going to be harmed because there's not these type of projects or consumption taking place. And essentially, this entire process that we see right here is that crowding out effect. Crowding out effect. So the government, by doing something that it always does, by selling bonds to the public, it can actually harm future generations by pushing up interest rates through this economic mechanism and channel. So another implication that we have to be worried about with the government running deficits year after year after year. So this leads us and segues us into the idea of fiscal sustainability. Exactly, what should the government be spending money on? We know that they spend a lot of money on a lot of different projects and a lot of different pieces of infrastructure, but we want to make sure that they are spending that money on infrastructure and goods and services that are going to be generating some type of benefit for everybody involved. So we want to be practicing some type of fiscal sustainability. And that occurs when the present value of all projected future revenues equals the present value of all projected future spending. So once again, a little bit of a cost-benefit analysis. As long as the benefits exceed the expenditures or exceed the cost, then we can say that the government undergoing this project is going to be a very good thing for us. But if the costs exceed the benefits, then it's not a very good thing for the government to do. It's just essentially wasteful spending in this case. So the government should be practicing some type of fiscal sustainability in order to ensure that the projects that they're undertaking are generating some type of positive benefits, not only for the government themselves, but also for its citizens, so people like you and I, and also firms and businesses. So with all of this in mind, take a look at all the implications that we took a look at within this particular section, because the government running deficits year after year after year, it can lead to some very, very bad economic times for our future generations, and we don't necessarily want to harm our children or our children's children. So we have to sort of bite the burden or bite the bullet in this instance. So we want to see exactly how we can weigh our own sort of benefits with our children and our children's benefits. So with all of this will end chapter number 10. We take a look at the political and economic sort of intertwinings of economics with fiscal policy, a lot of economic analysis, a lot of political analysis as well. So go ahead, take a look at a few of the sort of government's role in sort of inducing or influencing the economy with fiscal policy, the primary tools, and the economic analysis that goes along with all of that. So, as always, good job. And I'll see you guys in chapter number 11, where we talk a little bit about everybody's favorite subject, which is money. See you guys there.